Double honors to the apostles of Jesus that rule of well. And peace, blessings, salutations to the hopeful elect out there, to the saints of the 12 tribes of Israel. Lord's will you edified. And this is the black codes of here in America, aka Babylon the Great. With the history of the hatred of Esau. And it says black codes were restrictive laws designed to limit the freedom of African Americans and ensure their availability as a cheap labor force after slavery was abolished during the Civil War. Though the Union victory had given some 4 million enslaved people their freedom, the question of free black people's status in the post-war South was still very much unresolved. Under black codes, many states require black people to sign yearly labor contracts. If they refuse, they risk being arrested, fined, and forced into unpaid labor. Outraged over black codes helped undermine support for President Andrew Johnson and the Republican Party. And again, you gotta know this history, because this is history that Esau wants to hide and get rid of. I just get to say how the things of Esau sort up. You gotta understand this so-called white man, which he tries to hide underneath these bannikers of, white, Christian, Catholic, a good American, a good Samaritan. We all come from Africa. We're all humans. Nah. Prior to this, lead up to after the 1960s or the 70s, and after the Civil Rights Movement, and then the drugging up and the gangster, this whole bringing it of the music. You try to shape an integration to lure us asleep. We knew that you were the devil. We knew that you were the enemy. But now, today, our people have been bamboozled, and our people have gone to sleep. Like the scripture says, Judah was like a lion, but now he's roughly paraphrasing as a couched lion. So it says that Reconstruction begins, and President Abraham Lincoln announced the impending passage of the Emancipation Proclamation in early 1863. The stakes of the Civil War shifted dramatically, and Union victory would mean no less than revolution in the South, with a peculiar institution of slavery and had dominated economic, political, and social life in the antebellum years. In 1865, as the war drew to a close, Lincoln shocked many by proposing limited suffrage for African Americans in the South. He was assassinated days later. However, his successor, Andrew Johnson, would be the one to preside over the beginning of Reconstruction. Did you know, in the years following Reconstruction, the South reestablished many of the provisions of the black codes in the form of the so-called Jim Crow laws? These remained firmly in place for almost a century, but were finally abolished with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So, Esau always loved to say, "Oh, you wasn't there. Oh, it was so long ago. Oh, forget about it. We're all one." Nah, it wasn't that long ago. I think my grandmother was born, I really want to say, in this time era. Matter of fact, you have certain grandparents that were born in the 1950s that's still alive. So it said Johnson, a former senator from Tennessee who had remained loyal to the Union during the war, was a firm supporter of states' rights and believed that such federal government had no say in issues such as voting requirements at the state level. Under his Reconstruction policy, which began in May 1865, the former Confederate states were required to uphold the abolition of slavery made official by the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. You gotta remember, these Edomites were using a lot of code words and code names to try to justify, but in the whole time, underhanded and secretly by different codes and laws, they were enslaving our people and still had us, in subjugation, even to this day. They say that you're free, but you're not fucking free. That's why you gotta have a Social Security card, birth certificate. You gotta have an ID. And that's why you pay taxes. Beyond those limitations, the states and their ruling class, traditionally dominated by white planters, were given a relatively free hand and were building their own governments. Passage of the Black Codes. So even as former enslaved people fought to assert their independence and gain economic autonomy during the earliest years of Reconstruction, white landowners acted to control the labor force through a system similar to the one that had existed during slavery. To that end, in the late 1865, Mississippi and South Carolina enacted the first Black Codes. In South Carolina, Charleston, I was just down there, has a lot of history and a lot of hatred for Jake. Mississippi law required black people to have written evidence of employment for the coming year each January. If they left before the end of the contract, they would be forced to forfeit early wages and were subject to arrest. In South Carolina, law prohibited black people from holding any occupation other than farmer or servant unless they paid an annual tax of $10 to $100. This provision hit free black people already living in Charleston and former slave artisans especially hard. In both states, black people were given heavy penalties for vagrancy. Let's look up this word vagrancy. It says a state of living as a vagrant, homelessness, a decent so I guess basically at a low level, including forced plantation labor in some cases. Limits on black freedom. Under Johnson Reconstruction policies, nearly all the southern states would enact their own black codes in 1865 and 1866, while the codes granted certain freedoms to African Americans, including the right to buy and own property, marry, make contracts, and testify in court only in cases involving people of their own race. Their primary purpose was to restrict black people's labor and activity. You were damned if you did, damned if you don't. Some states limited the type of property that black people could own. Remember, you don't own nothing. While virtually all the former Confederate states passed strict vagrancy and labor contract laws, as well as so-called anti-enticement measures designed to punish anyone who offered high wages to a black laborer are already under contract. So, hey, they basically kept you in a certain tax bracket. Salaki. So, Salaki. Black people who broke labor contracts were subject to arrest. Beating and forced labor and apprenticeship laws forced many minors, either orphans or those whose parents were deemed unable to support them by a judge, into unpaid labor for white planters. Passed by a political system in which black people effectively had no voice, the Black Codes were enforced by all white police and state militia forces, often made up of Confederate veterans of the Civil War across the South. Impact of the Black Codes. The restrictive nature of the codes and widespread black resistance to their enforcement enraged many in the North, who argued that the codes violated the fundamental principles of free labor ideology. Yeah, Esau always promised you and always did shit, and going into Sirach, the 12th chapter, never trust thine enemy. After passing the Civil Rights Act over Johnson veto, Republicans in Congress effectively took control of Reconstruction. The Reconstruction Act of 1867 required southern states to ratify the 14th Amendment, which granted equal protection of the Constitution to former enslaved people, and enact universal male suffrage before they could rejoin the Union. The 15th Amendment, adopted in 1870, guaranteed that citizens' right to vote would not be denied on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. During this period of radical Reconstruction, 1867 and 1877, black men won election to southern state governments, even to the U.S. Congress. And I remember reading about this. That pissed Esau off. And during 1877 to, I want to say roughly, in 1964, you had that came when Dr. Claude Anderson was talking about when Jake started getting their own towns. You had Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma. You had North Carolina. Basically, a lot of places, Georgia. You had a lot of places where they drowned it with water, that's covered with water. You got a lot of places which were Jakes, which they put highways over. So during these times, you had a lot of Jakes that started, getting their own little, some money, their own places, their own banks, their own schools, etc. And Esau didn't like that. That's why you had a lot of those so-called white mobs was burning Jake's neighborhoods down and accusing Jake of rape. A lot of accusation against those governments. Well, Jake that was able to get a little seat in the government, Esau didn't like that at all. As indicated by the passage of the Black Codes, however, white Southerners showed a steadfast commitment to ensuring their supremacy in the survival of plantation agriculture in the post-war years. Support for Reconstruction policies waned after the early 1970s, undermined by the violence of, see that? Yep, here it go. So after 1970s, after they try to, have a little leniency with Jake to go into the votes and voting and, getting little seat in, the government, Esau ain't like that at all. The Ku Klux Klan. So I said, undermined by the violence of white supremacists, organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan. By 1877, when the last federal soldiers left the South and Reconstruction drew to a close, black people had seen little improvement in their economic and social status, and it still hasn't changed to this day. And our people have been voting, so-called voting for democracy. Our people are all into the left wing, the right wing, the Democrats and the Republicans. But what the fuck have they done for our people? Not a goddamn thing. Now, we were suffering here, being treated unjustly here, and it's still the same thing to this day. And the economic and social status and the vigorous efforts of white supremacist forces throughout the region had undone the political gains they had made. Yeah, because they were fucking Jake up, man, burning their towns down. Discrimination will continue in America with the rise of Jim Crow laws, but would inspire the civil rights movement to come, that was also paid off and set up too by Esau, the elites, going into those decrees. But that's just a little history of Esau, the hatred that Esau has on you, so-called Negroes, and also on you Hispanics and Latinos and Native Americans. The Lord, you was edified. Hey, Shalom.